What replaced gold when belief failed? When gold stopped working, nothing shattered overnight. Coins still shined, vaults still locked, but belief, the thing that gave metal its meaning, began to drain away quietly. And when belief failed, something else had to take its place. To understand what replaced gold, we must return to a Europe confronting its own limits. Wars had drained treasuries. Discoveries had flooded markets with metal. What once signaled scarcity now suggested excess. Prices shifted. Confidence wavered. Gold was still heavy, but it no longer felt solid. The first reveal appears in how states responded. Instead of anchoring value to metal, they began anchoring it to obligation. Taxes due in the future. Revenues yet to be collected. Promises backed not by weight, but by capacity. Value moved from what could be held to what could be enforced. Gold mattered less than who could demand payment. The second beat followed as institutions formalized this shift. Paper claims circulated, trusted because they were redeemable through authority rather than metal. Credit expanded beyond physical reserves. What sustained value was no longer scarcity, but coordination. People accepted symbols because systems ensured others would accept them too. This was not abandonment of gold. It was replacement of belief. Metal had once guaranteed trust through nature. Now trust was manufactured through structure. Courts, tax offices, and administrations became the new anchors of value. The system worked not because gold existed, but because obligations were unavoidable. By the time people realized what had happened, value no longer depended on what lay in vaults. It depended on what society agreed to honor. And that agreement would prove more powerful and more fragile than gold had ever been. As the reveal deepened, the consequences of replacing metal with obligation became clearer. Value now flowed from predictability rather than permanence. Gold did not change. Governments did. Their ability to collect, enforce, and coordinate determined whether symbols retained meaning. Trust shifted from nature to institution. The conflict emerged when that trust was tested. Wars, defaults, and political upheaval strained the systems meant to guarantee value. Unlike gold, obligations depended on continuity of authority. When administrations weakened, belief wavered. Paper claims were questioned. Acceptance slowed. What had replaced gold revealed a vulnerability gold never had. It required faith in governance. The buildup intensified as states responded with structure instead of substance. Rules multiplied. Central authorities expanded. Enforcement hardened. The system adapted by strengthening coordination rather than reverting to metal. Gold became reference, not foundation. Stability depended on managing expectation, not mining supply. Citizens adjusted gradually. Value became something expected to hold, not something inherently stable. Savings depended on policy. Wages depended on fiscal capacity. The abstract replaced the tangible. For many, this felt like progress. For others, it felt like exposure. Belief had not disappeared. It had been redirected. By this stage, Europe faced a new reality. What replaced gold was not paper alone, but trust in systems capable of surviving stress. Value now rested on cooperation at scale. When it worked, it outperformed metal. When it faltered, nothing physical remained to fall back on. The replacement had succeeded. But it had also raised the stakes. Because when belief is no longer anchored in substance, every failure becomes a question of legitimacy. The tension peaked when belief itself became a policy objective. Authorities no longer assumed trust would follow stability. They worked to produce it deliberately. Communication strategies expanded. Guarantees were announced. Backstops multiplied. Value depended as much on confidence management as on economic output. The conflict sharpened as crises exposed the difference between coordination and conviction. Systems functioned, yet belief wavered. Markets asked not whether obligations could be enforced, but whether they should be. Political divisions translated into financial doubt. Trust, once relocated from gold to institutions, now depended on cohesion those institutions struggled to maintain. The buildup intensified when extraordinary measures became ordinary. Emergency tools were normalized. Temporary guarantees lingered. Balance sheets expanded to absorb shock after shock. Each intervention reinforced the system's capacity, but also its dependence on belief. Value held because people expected it to be defended indefinitely. Citizens sensed a shift intuitively. Stability felt conditional. Security felt maintained rather than inherent. The absence of metal removed a psychological anchor that had once limited imagination and fear. Now value existed as long as cooperation held. And cooperation felt increasingly fragile. Inside policymaking circles, unease spread. Had replacing gold with obligation made value more adaptable or more vulnerable? The system had gained flexibility, but lost finality. There was no natural floor to fall back on. Only trust, constantly renewed, constantly tested. By this stage, the transformation was complete. Gold had been replaced not by paper, but by belief institutionalized. Value survived because society chose to keep it alive day after day. The question was no longer what backs money. It was how much belief a system can ask for before it begins to strain. The reckoning arrived when belief could no longer be taken for granted. Systems still functioned. Payments cleared. Markets opened. Yet beneath the mechanics, confidence felt thinner than before. Value survived, but it no longer felt inevitable. The climax unfolded as Europe confronted the true cost of replacing gold with obligation. The shift had unlocked scale, flexibility, and speed, but it had also tied value to continuous cooperation. Every crisis demanded reassurance. Every shock required response. Stability depended not on what existed in vaults, but on what institutions promised to defend again and again. This realization changed the conversation. Policymakers began acknowledging that belief could not be manufactured endlessly. Guarantees worked best when rare. Backstops protected confidence only when credible. Trust, once centralized, needed renewal through transparency, restraint, and limits that felt real. Value required boundaries, not just capacity. The resolution emerged through recalibration rather than reversal. Gold was not restored as anchor, but neither was belief left unbounded. Rules were clarified, commitments narrowed, systems emphasized predictability over expansion. The goal shifted from proving strength at all costs to preserving trust at sustainable levels. What endured from this chapter was a quiet but essential lesson. Money backed by belief can outperform metal, but only if belief is treated as finite. When trust is assumed to be infinite, it erodes. When it is respected as fragile, it endures. Europe did not return to gold. It learned how to live without it by understanding what had truly replaced it. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. What